Welcome students. Okay, I'm going to show you how I would annotate this text. First thing I want to do is make my margins bigger. So I'm going to go to Layout and Orientation, and I'm actually going to make it a portrait view rather than landscape. And then I'm going to go to Columns and switch it from 2 to 1, and finally Margins and make them normal size. You can make them bigger, but normal should be fine. Now I'm using my new Microsoft Surface with lots of fancy tools. But you could of course do this on paper with pen and a highlighter. I recommend you use at least 2 different kinds. I'm going to make mine yellow, and we can change colors too as needed. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to highlight the name of my author here, Kwame Anthony Appiah, because I don't know much about him and I want to learn more. And then finally, secondly I should say, I'm going to underline this subtitle here that seems to be like a thesis almost, right? Not every opinion needs to be underwritten with your identity. So I'll write thesis ? And see if that bears out. Now let's start reading. As a white man, Joe begins, prefacing an insight, revelation, objection, or confirmation he's eager to share, but let's stop him right there. I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to circle as a white man because there's a personal connection to the text that I can make. I'm a white man and I find myself saying this a lot. So I'll write that there. But let's stop him right there. Aside from the fact that he's white and a man, what's his point? What does it signify when people use this now ubiquitous formula? And I'm going to highlight that word ubiquitous because it's a tricky word that I want to come back to. I look it up and I see that it means everybody does it, right? So I'm going to make a note. Everybody does this to affix an identity to an observation. Typically, it's an assertion of authority, so that's one reason that we do it. As a member of this or that social group, I have experiences that lend my remarks special weight. The experiences being representative of that group might even qualify me to represent that group. Occasionally, the formula is an avowal of humility. That's a second reason. It could be both at once, as a working class woman, blah, blah, blah. And so those are the 3 reasons. It could be to show authority, to show that you're not part of some other group and so you're not an expert, or it could be both. And then finally, he says that this is problematic. And I'm going to circle that in red because that's an important question. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with using as a blank? Now, the as a concept is an inherent feature of identities. That word identity seems like an important one, so I'm going to highlight it. For a group label like white men to qualify as a social identity, there must be times when the people to whom it applies act as members of that group and are treated as members of that group. You have to act like a white man and be treated like a white man, whatever that means. We make lives as men and women, as blacks and whites, as teachers and musicians, yet the very word identity points toward the trouble. So there's that word identity again. It comes from the Latin idem, which means the same. Because members of a group identity have experiences that depend on a host of other social factors. They're not the same. So that's the problem. We treat people within a group as if they're the same, but they're not. Being a black lesbian, for instance, isn't a matter of simply combining African-American female and homosexual ways of being in the world. Identities interact in complex ways. That's why Kimberly Crenshaw, a feminist legal theorist and civil rights activist, introduced the notion of intersectionality. Seems like a really important word. I'm going to highlight that one for sure, which stresses the complexity with which different forms of subordination relate to one another. I'm actually going to circle it in red because it's even more important. I want it to jump out to me. Racism can make white men shrink from black men and abuse black women. Homophobia can lead men in South Africa to rape gay women but murder gay men. Sexism in the United States in the 1950s kept middle-class white women at home and sent working-class black women to work for them. So there's some examples of what he means by intersectionality. Now, so notice that they have to relate to one another, these different forms of subordination. And so that suggests what he's talking about when he says intersectional forms of group identity. So I'm going to highlight that too. What an important word. Now, let's go back to Joe with his NPR mug and his man bun. A little humor there, and I'm going to note that down as part of the tone that he's using, maybe to keep his audience interested. Or are you picturing perhaps a Make America Great Again tank top and a high and tight? Now, notice he gives 2 different examples there to make his point, right? There's different kinds of quote-unquote white people, and they're very different from each other. The hipster and the Trump voter. Having an identity doesn't by itself authorize you to speak on behalf of everyone of that identity, so it can't really be that he's speaking for all white men, but he can at least speak to what it's like to live as a white man, right? There's an important question, and his answer is no, see? Not if we take the point about intersectionality. Still making some marks on these. I want to make sure it's nice and neat so that I can come back to it and it's useful to me. If Joe had grown up in Northern Ireland as a gay white Catholic man, his experiences might be rather different from those of his gay white Protestant male friends there, let alone those of his childhood pen pal, a straight Cincinnati raised Reformed Jew. Now there's a really important point. Having an identity doesn't by itself authorize you to speak on behalf of everyone of that identity. So I'm going to highlight that in purple because that seems to me like a controlling or central idea, almost like a thesis, the claim that he's making, that he's trying to prove. You don't get to speak for your entire group just because you're one of them. So then there's that word intersectionality. I want to connect those points. And so I was reading that before. Cincinnati raised Reformed Jew. While identity affects your experiences, there's no guarantee that what you've learned from them is going to be the same as what other people of the same identity have learned. We've been here before, and as soon as I see that indicates to me that we're dealing with a little bit of historical context. So I'm just going to mark that down, historical context. And I'm going to stop here because I think you get the idea. If you have further questions, please ask in class.